What I see in Pakistan brokering this ceasefire between America and Iran is not diplomacy. It is a transaction, a quiet, calculated, 2-decade-in-the-making transaction, and the price America paid will not appear in any headline. Think about that for a second. The most powerful military machine in human history, a country that spent $886 billion on defense in 2023 alone, according to the U.S. Department of Defense, needed a country with a GDP smaller than the state of Texas to walk into Tehran and close the deal it couldn't close itself. That is not a detail. That is the story. Most analysts are going to tell you this was about back-channel diplomacy, existing relationships, Islamabad's old ties with Tehran, and they are not wrong, but they are nowhere near the whole story. Because what actually happened here involves three things that nobody on television is connecting for you. First, what America could not do militarily that it needed Pakistan to do diplomatically. Second, what Pakistan received in exchange, and it is not what you think. And third, what this ceasefire actually signals about where American power sits right now, in the spring of 2026, compared to where it sat 20 years ago. By the end of this, you will understand the Pakistan-Iran ceasefire better than 99% of the people who have already formed a strong opinion about it. And I need you to stay with me through the first part, because the foundation is what makes the rest of it make sense. Here is the number I want you to hold on to through everything that follows. 19. That is the number of documented direct diplomatic attempts between Washington and Tehran since 2005, according to the Council on Foreign Relations Crisis Tracking Index, as of March 2026. 19 attempts. 0 produced a durable ceasefire. 0 produced a normalization framework. 0 produced anything that held for longer than 14 months. And then Pakistan, a country that itself is on the IMF's emergency lending program, that is managing its own civil-military crisis internally, walked into Tehran, sat down for 72 hours, and came out with a deal. 19 American attempts produced nothing. 1 Pakistani attempt produced what you are watching right now. That gap is not an accident. That gap has a structure, and the structure is what this analysis is going to walk you through. There are 3 mechanisms at work here, and each one is more consequential than the last. Let's start from the root, because if you want to understand why Pakistan could do what America couldn't, you have to understand what American power actually is in 2026. Not what it was in 2001, not what it was in 1991 when the Cold War ended and the United States stood as the only pole in a unipolar world. What it is right now, today. American power has 2 components. The first is kinetic, the ability to destroy things. The second is relational, the ability to make other states do what you want without destroying them. The United States has never been stronger on the first. It has never been weaker on the second. And this ceasefire is a direct product of that asymmetry. Here is the historical precedent that matters. In 1973, the United States brokered the Paris Peace Accords to end American involvement in Vietnam. Henry Kissinger flew between capitals for months. He used a third country, Norway provided the quiet diplomatic backchannel, to reach North Vietnam. America's direct credibility with Hanoi was 0, so America used Norway's credibility as a proxy. The Nobel Committee awarded Kissinger a peace prize for what was, structurally, an admission. America needed a middleman because America itself had become the problem. That is the signature you are watching repeat in 2026. For Iran, America is not a neutral party. It is not a mediator. It is the party that unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018, reimposed maximum pressure sanctions that contracted Iran's GDP by 6.8% in a single year, according to the World Bank's Iran Country Report of April 2020. Iran's leadership does not distinguish between American administration changes. From Tehran's perspective, every American government is one election away from doing what Trump did in 2018. And that means any deal made directly with Washington carries a structural expiration date. Pakistan does not carry that liability, and both sides know it. But here's the part that most analysis skips over, and it is the part that explains why this happened now, in 2026, and not 3 years ago. Pakistan's army chief, General Asim Munir, has spent the last 18 months systematically rebuilding Islamabad's value proposition to every major power simultaneously. He has met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He has met with Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun. He has met with American CENTCOM commanders. and he has maintained direct communication lines with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps through channels that predate 2020. Richard Haass, former president of the Council on Foreign Relations, described Pakistan's strategic position this way in a January 2026 piece in Foreign Affairs. Pakistan occupies a rare geography of simultaneous necessity, needed by China for the China-Pakistan economic corridor, needed by the Gulf for labor and security guarantees, needed by America for counterterrorism cooperation, and uniquely positioned to speak to Iran without triggering Israeli red lines. That is not a description of a failing state. That is a description of a state that has quietly made itself indispensable to every player in the game. And here is why that matters, not just abstractly, but for the specific mechanics of what was agreed to in this ceasefire. Because what Pakistan carried into Tehran was not just goodwill. It carried guarantees, specific, documented, structured guarantees. And those guarantees came with a price tag that Washington agreed to pay before the negotiations even started. And here is where this gets personal for everyone watching this, because the price America paid is coming out of a system you are already living inside. Here is where this stops being a geopolitics story and starts costing you money. And this is the part most people never connect to what they see at the gas pump. America's guarantee to Pakistan, documented across 3 separate Reuters dispatches between February and March 2026, includes 3 components. Component 1, a quiet rollback of the IMF conditions that Washington has been using as structural leverage over Islamabad's $3 billion standby arrangement. Specifically, and this is important, the conditions relating to Pakistan's civilian energy subsidies. Those subsidies directly affect what Pakistani households pay for electricity. But the rollback also signals to every other country currently inside an IMF program that American-backed conditionality is negotiable if you have the right leverage. That is not a small signal. Component 2, a pause in American pressure on Pakistan's nuclear program review. Pakistan currently has approximately 170 nuclear warheads, according to the Federation of American Scientists' Nuclear Notebook, as of January 2026. There has been quiet American pressure inside multilateral forums to bring Pakistan into a new non-proliferation framework. That pressure has now been, in the language of diplomatic cables obtained by The Intercept, set aside for a minimum review period of 18 months. 18 months is a long pause, and Pakistan knows exactly what it bought with this ceasefire. Component 3, and this is the one that directly connects to what you pay for energy, a restructuring of American posture toward the Strait of Hormuz. Here is why that connects to your wallet. Roughly 21% of total global oil consumption passes through the Strait of Hormuz daily, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, as of December 2025. When tension builds in the Gulf, when American carrier groups position aggressively near Iranian waters, oil markets price in a risk premium. That premium is sitting between $12 and $18 per barrel right now, according to Goldman Sachs' commodities desk as of March 2026. That $12 to $18 per barrel sits invisibly inside every tank of gas you fill. The ceasefire removes the military escalation that was keeping that premium elevated. For the average American household driving 12,000 miles a year, according to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, a reduction of $12 per barrel translates to roughly $340 in annual fuel savings. That is not abstract. That is a number. But here is the counterintuitive part, the part that sounds impossible until you follow the mechanism. The countries that benefit most from sustained Hormuz tension are not Iran, and they are not America. They are the Gulf producers, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who sell oil at elevated prices while paying none of the geopolitical costs. A Goldman Sachs internal strategy note cited in the Financial Times in February 2026 put it precisely. Every month of Hormuz risk premium adds approximately $4.2 billion to Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund receipts. Every single month. Saudi Arabia did not want this ceasefire. And the fact that it happened anyway, over Riyadh's quiet resistance, tells you something very specific about where American foreign policy priorities sit right now. America needed the ceasefire more than the Gulf producers did, and that asymmetry, the world's largest military needing a deal more than the countries with no military, is the most important signal in this entire story. Because what that asymmetry reveals is this: American power in 2026 is running a structural deficit, not a financial deficit, though that is also happening, at $39 trillion as of March 2026, according to the U.S. Treasury, a strategic deficit, A gap between what America needs its power to accomplish and what that power can actually deliver through direct application. Pakistan filled that gap, and it will fill it again, because the gap is not going to close. And now I want to walk you through why that gap exists, and why the answer goes back much further than the Trump administration, further than 2003, further than most people are willing to look. Here's the part that nobody on television will say plainly. And the reason they won't say it is exactly the reason you need to hear it. The gap has a name in strategic studies. It is called the credibility-capability inversion. It describes a condition that every major power eventually encounters, usually in the final quarter of its hegemonic cycle, where its military capability continues to grow while its diplomatic credibility deteriorates, where the more force it has, the less leverage that force produces, where the threat of power becomes less believable precisely because the costs of using it have become too visible. Britain hit this point in 1956, the Suez Crisis. Britain and France launched a military operation to recapture the Suez Canal from Egypt's Nasser. Militarily, they won. Strategically, they collapsed. America pressured Britain to withdraw, and in withdrawing, Britain signaled to every country watching that its imperial reach had permanently exceeded its political will. Suez is the date historians now mark as the moment British power stopped being systemic and started being ceremonial. The United States is not in 1956, but it is in a transition that structurally rhymes with it. Before we go further, something deserves a full stop, because inside the geopolitical architecture being discussed here, there are real people. The United Nations OCHA reported in February 2026 that the preceding 8 months of Gulf-adjacent military escalation contributed to displacement of approximately 340,000 civilians across the Yemen-Oman Strait corridor. These are not statistics. These are families who moved because the geography around them became contested. Every strategic calculation that follows sits on top of that human reality. And any analysis that forgets that is not honest analysis. Now, the scenario that strategic planners are actually gaming privately as of spring 2026. The ceasefire is not a resolution. Every senior analyst who will speak candidly, including former National Security Council member Vali Nasser, writing in Foreign Policy in March 2026, describes it as a managed pause, not a structural settlement. The conditions that produce the conflict have not changed. Iran's nuclear enrichment is at 60% purity, according to the IAEA's February 2026 Safeguards Report, 20 percentage points below weapons grade, but inside a window that Israel's military planners describe as unacceptable. That number is not moving toward zero. It is sitting at 60% and holding. The gap between the ceasefire announcement and the underlying reality is not a communications problem. It is a structural signal. Official statements describe a new diplomatic era. The enrichment numbers stay at 60%. The Revolutionary Guard's proxy network in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon remains structurally intact. The Houthi maritime disruption posture has reduced, according to U.S. Naval Institute data, as of March 2026, but not ended. That gap between the announced stability and the continuing architecture is evidence of something specific. This ceasefire was designed to pause the conflict, not solve it. And the party that most needed the pause was Washington. Probability that this ceasefire holds beyond 18 months without a structural negotiation on Iran's enrichment program. Analysts at the International Crisis Group, in their March 2026 Iran assessment, put it at 35 to 45%. Those are not good odds, and they are not static. They compress with every month that the underlying enrichment question remains unaddressed. The strongest counterargument to everything I have just laid out, and smart people with serious credentials make it, goes like this. America has navigated managed pauses before. The agreed framework with North Korea in 1994 bought 8 years. The Reagan-era backchannel with Iran bought a decade of reduced Gulf hostility. Managed pauses are not failures. They are governance. And sometimes governance is buying time while better options develop. That is a serious argument, and it is partially true. The history of American diplomacy is filled with managed pauses that held longer than their critics predicted. The honest picture, stripped of both panic and complacency, is this. Whether this ceasefire holds depends almost entirely on whether Washington and Tehran can reach a structural agreement on enrichment during the window Pakistan has created. Pakistan cannot maintain that window indefinitely. It has its own internal pressures, its own political calendar, its own military calculations. The window is open. It will not stay open indefinitely. Step back from the ceasefire itself for a moment, because here is what all of this, Pakistan's role, America's strategic deficit, the enrichment numbers, actually means for how the next 5 years unfold. What I want you to take from this is not alarm. Alarm is not useful. What is useful is the map, and the map says this. We are watching the emergence of a new category of state, states that are not great powers, not failed states, but what strategists are beginning to call pivot brokers. Countries whose value comes not from their own military or economic mass, but from their simultaneous necessity to multiple competing powers. Pakistan, Qatar, Turkey, Indonesia, each of them in different configurations, occupying the same structural position, indispensable to enough players that they can extract disproportionate concessions from all of them. This is not a new phenomenon. The Ottoman Empire's final century was shaped by exactly this pattern. Smaller powers extracting enormous concessions from competing European empires by making themselves structurally necessary to both sides. Britain paid, France paid, Russia paid, and the Ottomans used that revenue to extend their own existence by roughly 60 years beyond what the underlying power calculus would have predicted. Pakistan is not the Ottoman Empire. But the structural logic is identical, and the implication for the next decade of global order is significant. Here is what to watch, not the headlines. The headlines will tell you whether the ceasefire holds week to week. What actually matters, the 3 data points that will tell you whether this is a genuine strategic realignment or a temporary pause, are these. Watch Iran's enrichment percentage. If it drops below 50% in the next 6 months, the ceasefire has substance behind it. If it holds at 60% or above, the pause is exactly that, a pause. Watch what Pakistan does next. If Islamabad uses its newly elevated status to push for a permanent seat in expanded multilateral forums, specifically the expanded G20 security dialogue that has been informally discussed since 2024, it signals that General Munir's team views this as a structural elevation, not a one-time transaction. That matters for everything that follows. And watch China. Beijing has been conspicuously quiet throughout this entire process. Conspicuously. China has significant economic interests in Iranian energy infrastructure. The 25-year Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement signed in March 2021 involves an estimated $400 billion in Chinese investment over its duration. China did not want American-Iranian hostility destabilizing that investment, but China also did not broker this ceasefire. Pakistan did, and Beijing will now have to calculate what it owes Pakistan for protecting Chinese interests in a corridor that China itself could not stabilize. Those 3 threads, enrichment, Pakistan's elevation, and China's calculation, will tell you the real shape of this story before any newspaper announces it. The people who understand how this works, not the version being sold on cable, but the structural version, the version with the actual mechanisms, those are the people who will navigate the next 5 years without being surprised by what happens. Because what happens next is already inside what has already happened. The dominoes are already in position. Wars almost never start because everyone decided they wanted one. And managed pauses almost never hold because everyone decided they should. They hold or they fail because of the specific decisions made in the months when the cameras are pointed somewhere else. The cameras are pointed somewhere else right now. Someone has to say it plainly. Now you know.